Okay. Welcome to the March 12th, 2024 meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission. First thing, we do have a lot of folks here, and I would ask to please mute your computer or microphone when we're not speaking, just to avoid interference. Thank you. And I will start with the meeting statement. And good evening. This open meeting of the Airport Commission is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website. Please note the meeting is being recorded. All attendees are participating by video conference, and please be aware the folks may be able to see you, not to screen share your computer. It may be captured by the recording. Supporting materials are available on the town website. I'll introduce each speaker, and please speak through the chair. Please, again, remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, and when you are speaking, please speak clearly for help generate accurate meeting minutes. Please do wait till the chair yields the floor to you and state your full name before speaking. Please do not engage in conversation with other members. And finally, each vote in the meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. And with that, we will move to any questions or concerns with the agenda as drafted. Hearing none, then we'll move on to, we have draft minutes for February 13th, 2024. Are there any questions or concerns with those minutes? Hearing or seeing none, we'll consider those adopted by unanimous consent. We have to ratify the warrant from February 21st. Is there such a motion or any questions or concerns with that warrant?
I'll make that motion.
And is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That'll bring us to public comment for any items that are not on the agenda, and we will be accepting public comment following our review of the south ramp apron expansion. So anything that is otherwise not on the agenda, please raise your virtual hand or wave at me, speak up. Hearing none, thank you. That'll move us on to pending leases and contracts set forth on Exhibit 1. And perhaps we could share that Exhibit 1, and I'll turn it over to Manager Carberg for review, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a number of pending business items, and I did want to take a minute to speak on those pending items. I am sorry to say that between staff vacations, response to additional meetings, and a last-minute switch to an alternate IFE firm, we do not have several contracts ready for approval. What I'd like to do is reach out through Boyana and Billy to discuss a separate short meeting in the next 7 to 10 days, just to review business items. I know that we have 3 task orders with McFarland Johnson, where the independent fee estimate, I believe that the independent fee estimate indicates these are within range, but we need to finalize that and document that process, as we won't seek funding for those. And ultimately, I think it's better that you review those actual contracts than asking that you delegate signing approval to the chair for 3 documents that you haven't seen. So we will reach out separately to have a short business only meeting the next 7 to 10 days. For the item that is ready for the Exhibit A, we have a lease agreement with Mountain Air Cargo with a $1,500 annual business fee. Mountain Air Cargo is assuming the FedEx routes via Providence instead of Wiggins Airways. It's, I believe, the same pilots flying the same Cessna Caravan 208 freighters. They're a large, reputable freight operator. They've been on site to review our operations, perform a fuel audit, and I recommend your approval.
And that's it, just that one?
That's the only one.
Are there any questions concerning the lease agreement with Mountain Air?
No.
Is there a motion to approve that lease agreement?
So
I'll
moved.
make, second,
Motion been made and seconded. Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
aye.
Ms. Planzer,
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. That'll take us on to pending matters. And the first up is to follow up on the joint meeting with the select board regarding the South Apron Ramp Expansion Project. Mr. Carberg.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I have for you, and I can share my screen momentarily, is I have a 10-slide presentation to follow up from the meeting and introduce three potential concepts going forward. What I'd like to do is share that presentation, then unshare my screen, turn it back to you, and you can delegate for commission or public comments as you see fit.
Yeah.
And I also have just a short list of bullet points for the project progress to date. But I can take those separately after, but I'll stop.
Oh, good.
Wait for your direction.
Hold on a second, please. We have someone who's not muted that we can hear. So please, again, if you're not speaking, please mute. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Carberg.
Okay, is everyone seeing my screen? Yes, thank you. So as I mentioned, I have 10 slides to follow up on the conversation from the Joint Airport Commission Select Board meeting on March 4th. There were 4 areas of discussion that I noted. The first was that the airport, the airport and select board both expressed desire that the airport delay or revisit, I heard both terms, the berm as it was designed. The second was to leave as many trees or as much existing vegetation as possible. The third was to continue with the ramp only project. And then the fourth was to review for staff to bring this item back to the March 12th Airport Commission meeting. So based on that discussion, I've taken 6 actions over the past week consistent with the feedback expressed in that previous meeting. So I informed the engineer that I would be delaying and revisiting the berm portion of the project. I took steps with my stakeholder team to protect an additional 3.5 acres of woodland, and I'll follow up with a figure in the next slide. I issued a press release with the revised limits of work, or we call the LOD, the limit of disturbance. I received feedback and comments, and these are available in the packet. And I waited to issue the notice to proceed until I could verify that the tree protections were in place and that the airport, the engineer, and the contractor had all reviewed the limit of disturbance. And then here I am back in front of you, soliciting the further discussion and seeking your direction. So third slide, this is the tree protection detail. So what I've taken here is I've marked up the figure from the press release that I revised with our engineer. So what I'm showing here is the green line is the limit of disturbance, or the revised limit of disturbance that we put into place. The orange, I'm sorry. I've marked it up additionally with the orange bracket shows 3.5 additional acres of woodland that we kept. And the red brackets show the 1.9 acres of woodland that were removed. So in bringing this to the commission for further discussion, I wanted to set this up with the points that at least I thought were major considerations or items for your own discussion, knowing that you might have your own or additional items as well. And these 3 major considerations that I'm bringing forward to you. Public feedback was clearly against the project as presented. I clearly heard that the public wants us to retain trees in the existing woodland to the maximum extent practicable, and that the airport should continue to actively mitigate any additional noise as part of this ramp expansion. And then, how to direct this. I've prepared 3 potential paths forward, and I'll spend the bulk of the rest of the slides discussing those. So the first option is to enhance the existing woodland through active forest management. I heard several people mention, and they were talking about ecological services, items that trees can perform, and that active management, I think, could be used to emphasize those particular ecological services. And just for example, noise attenuation could be met by managing to taller trees with fuller crowns, or targeted plantings or replantings of large evergreen species. We may also want to consider maintaining forest health by addressing the escaped yellow bamboo in this woodland, which could interfere with competition for resources by pitch pine. And then I've linked to an article, or I've copied an article on the right from, I believe, the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. But it's an update on the southern pine beetle and its impact on pitch pine. The only way to manage for that, I believe, is to cut trees down. So we might want to consider, under at least this scenario, active monitoring for the pine beetle. Yeah, I'll just say my master's degree was in forestry years ago. I enjoy the science, but really there's a role here for retaining a qualified forestry or forest management consultant who could speak even further to some of these options. The next idea is what I'm calling a noise wall. There are other terms for it as well. This is an option. It's called different things in other places: an acoustical barrier, a noise attenuator, etc. But I'm going with wall. So by a wall, I mean a purpose-driven physical barrier that's installed with minimal tree removal. I think the ramp side for a wall might be preferred for both function and aesthetics. And by that, I mean, the closer this wall is to the source of sound, the better it might perform at deflecting or minimizing it. And I also heard, from an aesthetic standpoint, people might not necessarily want to look at a wall. So if we put it on the other side of the woodland, I think that might be to a benefit as well. I would recommend, an acoustical evaluation. We have a firm already on board with the project. Their name is HMMH. They're sort of the premier acoustical aeronautical firm. And I say that, because there are different materials or different ways that noise walls or noise barriers could be made to accomplish specific tasks. Example, noise deflection versus noise absorbance. And an expert should look at that so it would perform the best way it's intended. I'm not an engineer, but I think that there's a wind loading review required. Any structure this big, this massive, and the way the wind blows on Nantucket should probably be reviewed for wind as well. And I mentioned a little bit about the different materials. They not only, my limited research, perform differently, but they all have different cost and lead time implications as well. Some can be built on site, some are trucked in. I would need more information on that. On the right, I just have a potential product that came up in Google searches. Someone else had also sent me the same link. This is one of the items available at soundfighter.com. I think this has a highway on the other side of it and a grass hill on this side. So what I've done, I want to stress two things. This is a spoiler alert on slide 9. Public feedback was overwhelmingly in favor of this option, so I asked our engineer to just prepare a concept figure. This isn't a design drawing, it's just a point of discussion. The red line shows where this wall might be able to be located, could minimize additional tree disturbance. And I've also asked the engineer just to include a plan. The horizontal scale, I don't think is, the horizontal work, I don't think is to scale, but I think the vertical work is to scale. So they're showing a 18 to 20 foot noise wall, trees, then the perimeter fence, and then the ramp expansion. The third option is a noise berm with off-site soil. This could be similar to the original design concept. Some additional items we'd want to discuss are probably establishing a standard for soil testing into the material sourcing requirements. And then there are just a number of additional unknowns. If we're sourcing different material that's siltier or clay-based, does this change the slope? Does it need to have an HDP liner if it's gone through rigorous testing? Can we include irrigation in a berm related to replantings? Does that give us more flexibility in what we would replant this berm? So feedback received as of 9 a.m. this morning. I've received 28 emailed comments. 21 are in the original packet that posted on Friday. The 7 that I received after the packet posting date are in a handout. So there are 2 documents online. If you pull our agenda, you have to find that. There's the packet and there's the handout. So if you don't see your comments in one of these documents, it should be in the other. I don't think I've received any additional comments on these sort of options. I've received some general comments, but all of these will be updated into the public record or made available as handouts and searchable. So if you don't see your comments in either of these, I'm still catching up with what I've received, but I think I have everything as of 9 a.m. this morning. So these comments are all available in your packet. My own summary of the comments received as I've read them is 1 comment was in favor of forest management or a wall, sort of an either or maybe it was a both. 22 were in favor of a noise barrier of some sort. 3 were in favor of either a noise barrier in the wall or an off-airport soil berm. And 2 were really not in favor of any of those 3 items and spoke to relocating the ramp. And then finally, this is my last slide. There are several ways the commission could direct. It is, this is here for your direction. I'm just hopefully teeing up a conversation for you and for the public. These include the project approaches listed, options 1, 2, or 3. Combination of those 3 projects, something else that you arrive to. And then also as part of this, staff are reviewing additional what we call operational controls. What goes along with the hot, warm, and cold approach to managing the ramp, and the maximum number of operational controls or administrative items staff control to reduce source noise. A couple other items just for the commission to consider. If there's specific additional direction you would like to give to the engineer. Under a default scope development, staff would develop a scope with the engineer and we would return with that scope to a commission meeting to discuss and for your approval, much like the public just saw in our previous number 4, pending leases and contracts. That's where we discuss pending leases, contracts, scopes. And then the other default is typically staff and the engineer review the timing and the funding strategy. And that's what we would do unless you were to direct differently. And then it's also worth considering as commissions, in my humble opinion, if you have any directions you want to give to me or staff as to a stakeholder group, informing them, keeping this process in the public sphere and the public informed. So with that, I'm happy to go back and bring these slides back up, but I know it's easier to see people for comments if I stop the screen share. So that's what I'm going to do right now.
Thank you, Mr. Carberg. Before we start the discussion on the wall and the information you just provided, I'm sure that there is also questions related to the soil that's being moved and the preparation of the area that was cut for the ramp. And could you maybe spend a little bit of time on that? My concern is that if we don't have a bit of a presentation on that and we open it up right now, it might segue into that, and perhaps several people have the same question. And so maybe if we go over that and then we'll come back to all of it.
Sure, I'll go back to sharing my screen. So everyone should see my cursor. There is a gray line. It might be hard to see on your screens, but this is the original extent of the woodland. It came out into about 30 feet, I believe, into the ramp. And it follows here to the perimeter road. The 1.9 acres of woodland were removed beginning last week, Wednesday, Thursday, and into Friday. And that's represented by this area here. The work that began on site, actually, if I refer to my bullets. So work began on May 6th. I believe that was a Wednesday. As of this meeting, we've completed seven calendar days, 142 days of work remain. The first week's work was defining the tree protection, tree clearing, stripping loam, installing barricades, and putting up silt fencing and excavating the drainage. This week's work, which includes this present week that has already elapsed, is installation of drainage structures and pipe, excavation for drainage chambers, installation of electric structures, electric duct bank installation, and hauling of surplus material to the sand pit, and that's underway. So the material located on site that's been removed, starting with this infiltration basin in the ramp footprint, has been hauled to the sand pit, segregated in soils. We've retained the HDPE liner, and we're discussing how to install it. The liner was purchased for a long linear piece of soil. I'm going to call it wrapping. We can still use it for that purpose. If that's what is best for the project, we will do that, and we're discussing that with our engineers now, the best way to stage that.
And for the benefit of the public, Mr. Carberry, when you refer to the sand pit, could you just generally describe the location?
Sure. So the sand pit is located approximately 400 yards to the Matachem side of the main runway. So the soil has moved, we're moving it away from the immediate neighbors, across the runway, and in the vicinity of the white, what we call the ASR9, or the airport radar.
Thank you. So with that, I'd like to open the floor up. I think we will, if it's okay with the commission, hear from the public and then get into a discussion amongst commissioners as to the direction requested by Mr. Carberg. And so with that, Mr. Keppel, your hand is up and the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much. And thank you to the commission for considering these alternative approaches to sound attenuation. I, of course, as many on the phone, would be interested in forest management as well as a physical barrier. So thank you. One question I have, which maybe just speaks to my lack of familiarity with the overall plan, is what happens to the small general aviation aircraft, for lack of a better term, the piston-driven single? Do those move south of the south ramp, or where are those going to be located? Is the south ramp taking over where they were parked on the grass? Are do they still stay there? Where will they be?
Mr. Carberg or Mr. Lasden, whichever you prefer.
I think I can take that. I'll share my screen again very quickly. Okay, we have some tie downs off of the edge. I believe this will become taxiway November. We'll have some tie downs along the edge of pavement here. And other than that, I would have to refer to Mr. Laston. I don't recall the number.
Mr. Lasden, anything further you'd like to
So
add?
yes, there are, if you go back, thank you, Noah. So there were tie downs in the area where this pavement is being expanded, and they are being moved plan left on this drawing. So over there. So the tie downs are being replaced one for one.
Thank you.
So they're going to move south of the expanded south ramp. And is your plan to attenuate the noise that's going to be caused by those several aircraft moving south towards Nobodere Beach and into the Nobodere Valley?
So I can answer that. My plan would be, if it's so directed by the commission, to direct options to the engineer for length, for features on the wall, additionality or phasing.
Right. I think that myself, my neighbors, residents of the Nobodere Valley and Nobodere Beach, if they were aware, if they were aware that all of those private piston-driven aircraft, for lack of a better term, were going to be moved south down into our neighborhood, we would be standing up and cheering for the continuation of the attenuation wall down to the south, right? We're going to be going from the fire to the frying pan, having additional noise on the new south ramp of large Class 3 jet aircraft, as well as the addition of, I don't know, sometimes there can be 50 or 60, piston-driven Cirrus aircraft. That's going to be a real degradation of the quality of life.
Thank you, Mr. Keppel. That's helpful for us to look at as part of the noise attenuation wall. And there's going to be more to come on that. So I appreciate those comments. And please, Mr. Carberg and Mr. Lasden, note that so that we can see how that might lay out and how we might be able to consider that in the design, I think. Ms. Lepre?
Hi, thank you so much. So I was reminded of the song by Joni Mitchell by my father about they paved paradise and put up a parking lot, and this sounds very much like that. I did not write a letter to Mr. Carberg, but I would be very much in favor of moving this project. I think there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of pushback, and that's maybe something that the commission might want to look at. So you can add number 3 to that. I really enjoyed reading the packet this week, all 800 pages. It was actually 811 yesterday. So thank you. It was a lot of great information. I had just a couple of questions about it because you put in that you were testing soil of the neighbors, and my property was on there, and it looks like we had contaminated soil, which I would assume since we had contaminated water, but I don't remember ever getting a letter about it or any information about it. So I would love to know what the numbers were for the soil on our lot. It was on actually the other side of our lot. And I also was wondering, it sounds like PFAS has been a problem for you guys with the airport and with the dirt for a while. It looks like you bought a machine to control the foam to keep it contained in 2019. And again, no information was given to anyone that I know of. And then my last is about the parking lot and my concern of lead poisoning for children. There's been a huge study done in California that talked about how the lead levels blood lead levels in children residing within a half of a mile of an airport were especially vulnerable to increase in due to the piston engine aircraft traffic. And they said even low lead blood levels could potentially harm children who are particularly vulnerable to lead pollution as their brains are still developing. In fact, lead is an infamous neurotoxin among children who are under age of 6. And I have a 6-year-old and twin 2-year-olds, and I know the Rosses have 1-year-olds, and I can think of at least 10 children just off the top of my head that live within a half a mile of this airport. So I'm just wondering, do I not let my children play in our yard because of this lead poisoning? Is this something you guys are considering? Are you going to, I know there was a study, but it was over 10 years ago. So it seems like if we're getting so much more air traffic, maybe we should start looking at that a little bit closer. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Lepre. I will try to, on your point of moving the project, I think that when the commission has a discussion following all the public comment, they could take that into consideration, whether there would be any support of that. It seems to me that this, where we're at with this, that there may not be support for that, but if anybody, amongst the commissioners wanted to support that, it would be something that could be discussed. In terms of the soil contamination and the lead poisoning, I would ask if I could, through Mr. Carberg, if perhaps you could coordinate with yourselves and Ms. Woods to see what information that you might be able to come up with as you're able, and reach out to Ms. Lepre. And then perhaps with respect to lead, I would be interested also to generally hear more of your findings, perhaps at the next meeting. Perhaps what you might come up with related to that. I don't think we need a whole presentation, but if you're going to if you are anyway going to do a bit of research and reply, I think that it would be good for us to simply be aware of the current state of affairs, if you would, with respect to current technologies and thinking, and risk factors, if you will, what might occur and that sort of thing, as from your research. So, Mr. Carver, does that seem reasonable?
Yes, will do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walsh. Mr. Walsh, you need to unmute.
There we go. I finally got it.
Okay, good job. Thanks, Mr. Walsh. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I'm new at this Zoom stuff, so I've been sitting for a half hour trying to get on the meeting, and I missed the first half hour of the meeting. Anyways, I just saw the I come in when Meredith was on the thing, and talking about the PFAS soil. If I've got your 800 and something page memo here, they kind of like drown you in paperwork, but that's par for the course. Anyways, on page 759 of that, you show areas next to the trees and the area that there was airport's foam going down. I believe you have checked all of the area there around there for PFAS foam. My idea was to remove that PFAS soil on the south ramp and replace it with clean soil from the area between the grass area between Juliet and Gulf. The area that they don't like me taxiing across, and all the areas adjacent to the ramp out to Foxtrot and Gulf. You could let that soil up. I don't believe that soil has PFAS in it, but you could dig that soil up, move it down to where you can use it later. Take any PFAS soil, take that the berm. Don't put a berm there. That berm is not. But take the insulation that you were going to put on that berm, put it in the hole that you get out of the grass between Juliet and Bravo, actually, and you could dig it as deep as you want, put the PFAS dirt in there, tar it over, That would give you wing room for your big airplanes to come in. That's what you're talking about, closing Foxtrot. Well, close Foxtrot. You're talking about removing pavement. Don't remove any pavement. Put pavement over that PFAS stuff with the liner underneath it and call it a deal. Okay, that was as far as the thing. As far as noise is concerned, that berm is not the answer. A simple, solid wood fence with soundproofing materials on it attached to the perimeter fence inside the trees would suffice to handle noise going off into that area. And especially if the noise is just the prop engine noise. That area should be general aviation anyways, and the area from Juliet to the terminal should be commercial operations, all of it. Take all of the general aviation, move it to your new ramp and the grass. And that's my thought on the thing. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
listening.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Okay, bye.
And we are going to, I think the staff and consultants are working on somewhat along the line of what you described in terms of how to handle PFAS containing soils, and then the noise wall and the exact positioning is something that I think we really need some acoustical studies. You can guess one position and I can guess another, and then you also have wind loading and engineering designs. So we'll have further discussion amongst the commission. Certainly appreciate the input, and hopefully we come to what is going to be the best functional design there. Mr. Sadowski.
Hi, Tom Sadlowski, a neighbor and the president of the Surfside Association. Just a comment about a vegetative sound barrier as opposed to a physical sound barrier, especially with the pines. You mentioned the beetles. If you've been to the area near Matticat where they've had to respond to the beetle infestation, if you get an infestation, you basically will be clearing your whole vegetative barrier. And I worry that over time, if something happened, relying on a vegetative barrier could turn out to be a disaster if we had to cut all the trees down. So I'm more in support of some kind of a physical barrier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sadowski. Ms. Khan?
Hi, thank you for taking the time to bring this to the public. I had actually a question about the barrier. So that's intended for noise only. I guess my question was, does it help at all with any pollution as far as like the lead exposure? I was unaware that some of the private jets, the smaller ones, I believe, the 2 to 9 seaters, do release lead. I believe it's called avgas. I probably am saying it wrong, AVGAS. But I just started to look into it, and then that brought up some reports that was a study was done from Santa Clara, I believe, in 2021, which led to EPA EPA enforcing or saying by 2030 they would like all the lead removed from the fuel. So that is 6 years away. So my concern would be the exposure to the residents in the nearby area around the airport, and if there's ways to reduce it. I know that 80% of an aircraft's lead emissions, occur during the plane's taxi, takeoff, and landing. And I know that there was a study that was done from the EPA that Nantucket was involved in that. But there was a woman in the article that I read from the Inquirer, Mayor Melissa Sullivan from EPA, and she said that Nantucket does have a low concentration of airborne lead, but there's multiple pathways of exposure, and the lead was only evaluated at one location, didn't test soil, just airborne. And then I just want to highlight one more thing, is that young children The younger the child, sounds awful, but the greater the risk. Young children absorb 50% of the lead that they're exposed to, whereas let's say that same lead would only, I would absorb about 5 to 10% since I'm older or older children. And then also, I know that they do blood tests at doctors' offices, but those are really only the active lead exposure. So after 20 to 30 days, you can't really tell. That's just the current lead exposure that the child is exposed to. And then after 30 days or so, but that lead exposure is gone. So it doesn't show earlier lead exposure that the child may have, maybe a year or 6 months or during the summertime if they go and get it tested in winter. So basically my question is, are there ways or we could come and perhaps limit the exposure from lead or the jet fuel or all of the airports taxing and landing and taking off? Just, I know within a mile or quarter of a mile, there's just a lot of kids and people there. So I do have concerns about that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. I think that part of our future study related to the noise barrier could also look at how that might help with emissions. Logically, I'm a little out of my lane there, but I would think that a barrier at over the height of the engines, depending on the wind direction and whatnot, could have some benefit. To your point on the lead, there's a difference there. Again, a little bit out of my lane. We have other experts that could address it better than me, but is the difference between avgas, which is leaded fuel, and mostly the piston type aircraft, as opposed to the jets, which run what they call Jet A, and that is, I believe, not leaded. So, and we've had a significant change in the fleet mix at Nantucket over the last decade, really, from you think back to the air taxis and the 402s, and those were running avgas as opposed to the more of the current fleet and the aircraft that are more likely to be parked here on this portion of the ramp. But all that being said, I think that along with a little bit of research and reaching out as we committed to try to do for Ms. Lepre, I think that you have sort of overlapping concerns, and certainly I think we share concerns as well for any kind of environmental protections that can be put in place, and really best management practices and that sort of thing within the context of applicable regulations. So I think it is something that we can have a look at and report back on. Mr. Hallowell.
There we go. Sorry, a little trouble unmuting. Good evening, Chairman Gasparo, members of the commission. Thank you for this meeting this afternoon, and also allowing me to speak. First, I'd like to applaud the commission and NOAA for taking the direction on looking at alternative options to the PFAS berm. I think that's a clear step in the right direction. I think it's alleviated a lot of fears and concerns, and I think you're moving in the right direction. The good news is obviously that issue seems to be moving into a positive solution. However, it's unveiled the second one that Aisha has just referred to, and that I've been receiving a lot of comments since the last public meeting about a new and growing health concern that really has to do with the concentrated jet exhaust that's expected from the south ramp into the into the Surfside neighborhood. And it's based upon two issues, really. And as always, Chairman Gasper, I'll never present a problem without a proposed solution for your consideration, which I plan to do right now. But let me set this up first. The two main issues have to do with the proximity of the new parking apron, which is really right on the southerly border of the Surfside neighborhood, with little distance between the jets and the populated areas for the exhaust to disperse or to dissipate before it reaches a populated area. The second is the specific location. The new parking will be just south of the Surfside neighborhood. And for anyone that either goes to the beach or lives in Nantucket, we know that the prevailing winds in the summer are out of the south, either south directly, southeast, or southwest, which for the majority of the time will be carrying, during the hot period, will be carrying that jet exhaust in. Just to refresh everyone's memory on this call, the plan for the larger jets to be parked here is during the 3 ramp operations, hot, warm, and cold, that during warm and cold, they will be towed in and towed out, engines off. So really no problem on exhaust and no problem on noise. But during the hot periods, summer, holidays, weekends, during the summer particularly, the plan is for them to power in, but to be towed out. And it's this powering in, this one leg of this operation that is really would be the source of these exhaust fumes coming into the neighborhood. I had an opportunity to speak with the chairman and Noah about this. They explained that the stress on the ground crews during these hot periods is such that it would be difficult to guarantee or to change that mode because of the stress on the staffing to be able to do it. And I understand that. But I think it also identifies what the underlying issue is. And the underlying issue is it's really a staffing issue. I don't know if you need additional tugs or additional staff, but I would pose the question and ask the commission to take a look at what would it take to be able to guarantee that we could tow those jets in as well as tow them out during the hot periods. And if you could do that, and I'm addressing not just the commission, but all the members of the community as well, that would mean that the jets would not be under power, their engines would not be running at the time after the disembarkment of the passengers and being towed over to the site. So there would not be any exhaust if we could accomplish this. The other part that I just like to raise a concern, and I think the reason this is really worth looking at is, in looking at the FEIR, it references this phase 1, which planned up to 10 planes, and I think there's less than that being planned right now. It might be 7 for this parking location. But it also referred to a total of 5 phases. So there is potential for expansion in the future, possibly up to 5 more phases, potentially up to 50 planes that could be parked south of, and this is into the future, south of this border. And that really concerns me for the volume of the exhaust. You know, living in Surfside in the summer, when the wind blows out of the east and we are located to the west of the airfield, the smell of the fumes is quite profound. And it has a pretty good distance to be dispersed. My concern is with those living right on the border of this, they're really going to smell some pretty concentrated fumes. So I would ask again that the commission, Mr. Chair, Noah, take a hard look at answering the question maybe for the next meeting. What would it take? I think it's a money issue, really, in terms of staffing, whether for tugs or for personnel to be able to support this. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Hallowell. I can address that we have, as a commission and with staff and consultants over the course of the past couple of years discussing this project, also discussed emissions and how important really having the robust management plan in place to try to improve really by lessening the on the ground run times is. And I agree. I think that is something that we need to continue to work on. Operationally, again, as we briefly discussed, I really have to defer to Mr. Carberg. I agree. I appreciate the suggestion with respect to you know, if there is some additional peak period or seasonal staffing, you know, how does management work into that? I will use this as a an opportunity to plug our housing project that we're desperately in need of and actively working on and have taken as also an absolute priority project, and it's directly related to those points. I would say that we should be careful, and Mr. Carberg could, I'm sure, expand on this. You know, in terms of the mandatory tow-in, a concern that I would have, and that, Mr. Carberry, after this, please feel free to correct me, but you know, if essentially you had an aircraft that landed and then had to taxi close to where they were going to go, but not all the way, and then sat there and ran, right, or had to remain live until such time a tug could get there and actually pull them into position, and that delta of that time was greater than if they had just pulled in, parked, and shut off. That's what no matter how many people you have, right? I just see that you have to, that I could see why, from an operational perspective, it would probably, it may not be beneficial to have an absolute, you know, so we say, thou shall do it, you know, only that way. And so that's just sort of, I think, a bit of a boots on the ground, but I understand that, you know, we are receiving the feedback, and I think do share the concern. And the question is, as really a goal of the overall project, I think of the commission has remained, how do we do this in a way that reduces, you know, the effects or impacts related to, you know, aviation on the surrounding community? And that really, I think a big piece of that is reducing the run times on the ground, whether it be for aircraft that are starting up prior to departure, which I really think is the bigger piece of things, as I mentioned to you from my observation there. You know, the ones that are coming in, the general tendency of, you know, what I've seen is they get into that place and they don't need to run anymore, but it's the startups and sometimes uncertainty as to when passengers may arrive, getting into the air system, and then perhaps complications related to the national air system, that someone can't actually depart when they had hoped to, and you know, those kind of factors. That being said, I think I speak for the commission and appreciate the comments and, again, approach and suggested solutions, and, you know, continue to be committed to working on the ramp operation strategy related to both the existing ramp and the expansion. It's not just this expanded area. The expansion really, you know, I think facilitates the ability to better operate the overall ramp. And again, I don't know that we really got into it at the joint meeting, and I'll take this opportunity to again mention that, you know, a portion of the project that's locally funded is related to permanent noise monitoring stations, cameras on masts that are going to be down along the ramp to allow the staff and the FBO to, you know, better monitor what's going on there. I think that there's new technology that the staff's investigating. You know, what can we leverage in terms of, you know, they call it ADSB, and, you know, programs that we already have a pretty robust system known as PASSOR. How might we be able to incorporate what they're really already doing related to, you know, the parking of air and servicing of aircraft? How do we tie that also into better monitoring and understanding of ramp times? So I can tell you that that's being worked on, and I think is something that we're really committed to trying to improve. And I think that's what could really help with, you know, reducing those emissions, you know, particularly that southeast breeze that brings them over into, you know, the Monahans, Skyline, Orkawar neighborhood. So I think we can continue on that, and, you know, keep everyone posted and see what we can do there.
One quick follow-up, if I might, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
I
please.
agree with what you've said, and I want to state that I wholly share Mr. Hallowell's interests on reducing even the cold operation impact on the taxiway. But what concerns me as the manager is that I own the taxiway, but I don't manage it. FAA ground control manages the taxiway. And my concern is some of those peak hot periods, such as Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. when we have 5 G650s arriving within 10 minutes of each other from New York. I can't take action which then backs those aircraft up onto Echo. I entirely share in the interest, but on a couple of these positional items, that's why I can't guarantee absolutes. But what I've done is I've Preston Harriman, he's worked in operations at the airport for 20 years. He is even far better than I am to discuss these specific operational strategies. I've asked him to put some together that he can bring back to us and discuss for specific operating examples we can affect. So thank you.
Mr. McKay?
Hello, and thanks. First of all, I again appreciate the communication we're having now that we hadn't had for so many years. It's very refreshing. And just a couple comments. Some people emphasize some of my points already, but in all my 35 plus years at the hospital, one of the big concepts I followed was always stepping back and looking at the big picture. And I think that's what we're really looking at here. And I think you're actually starting to do that, but you get caught up in minutia so many times when you think about just all the little things, the details, and you lose sight of the big picture. The big picture is you're extending parking and jets and noise and all that stuff in the only area of the airport perimeter that has residents. So the residents are saying, we don't want that. So I would echo Meredith Lepre. I would say, I think everybody would say, relocate to the north side. It's industrial, nobody's there. But I think that's probably the die is already cast, and I don't see that happening, unfortunately. But recognizing that concept, and although Mr. Carberg, I appreciate what you're just saying, and I certainly don't understand FAA owning the taxiway, but if the jets during the hot time, as far as towing is concerned, stayed on the other side where JetBlue is while they wait. It's just all this activity is generated towards the only residential area around the airport. You're hearing that now that the public has stepped up, that this is what we don't want. And now we're working about little details here and there. Obviously, if it was possible, and I'm not saying it is, to tow everybody where it is, well, you don't even need the wall for Christ's sakes, because it's all going to be quiet. You need the wall for visual barriers, perhaps. And I would also, by the way, echo what Mr. Keppel said about it. Wherever you're going to park planes, extend the wall. I mean, if you're going to have a plane parking either farther south, extend the wall, period, end of story, because the concept is trying to safeguard some quality of life for where the residents live. On the north side, you have industrial. So logic would say from almost any person I've talked to on this island, that's where all the activity should be, where there's not residents. But unfortunately, it's chosen because of proximity and such to have this increase by where the residents are. So that being the case, I appreciate the sustaining of trees. I appreciate the talking about build up a wall and evergreens, et cetera, but that's still all mitigating the big picture that it should have been on the other side. You may say 3 or 4 people talked about relocating. I think that number is ridiculous because I think everybody would appreciate relocating. However, the die was cast years ago before communication occurred to have it where it is. That being the case, I have no doubt, but given my logic and understanding of all my 67 years, you guys are going to continue to keep it here. I don't think it's realistic on your part to reconsider someplace else. That's where any activity, any noise, fumes, smells, etc., should be. Don't have a part. I understand the busyness, but if you have a jet landing, couldn't the FAA allow it to wait until a tow is available on the north side? I mean, that's the big picture. Anything to safeguard the noise and the smells here should be done. And I, again, recognize that you guys are working in that direction, and I appreciate that. But just as I say, put it in the big picture. There are things that can be done that I believe are in your control that may take some rethinking as is occurring right now. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. I think that several people may have the similar comment regarding relocation. So perhaps, I think we hit on it in the last meeting a little bit, but maybe we could spend a few minutes on that. There were decisions that were made going back to the early 2000s in terms of planning the airport. and significant infrastructure that was, it was decided, for a host of reasons, to keep the, majority of the operations on the west side, and that included then investing in the construction of the ARF, the Airport Rescue Firefighting Station, and the FBO building, expanding and fixing taxiways. Again, I think that that it also is not as simple as then you would just put in a rectangle of pavement over somewhere else and say there's the parking, there's significant infrastructure and crossing of the airfield. So I understand the point, and perhaps if we were making the decisions now that were made a couple of decades ago, it might be different. But I think that we sort of are where we are based upon some of that previous investment in infrastructure. And I would defer Mr. Carberg, if I could, whether, you had anything else sort of on that. I know you prepared a bit of a presentation for the last meeting. I don't think we need to re-go over the whole thing, but I do think that I know that those concerns are out there. And I hope that it can be understood why it's not just an option right now to say, never mind, with this spot, we're going to go put it elsewhere. Mr. Carberg, would you have an opportunity to expand on that at all, or did I get it?
I think that's good. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Perry.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. I wanted to thank the commission for not only this meeting, but the joint meeting you had with the select board. I know it took up a lot of everybody's personal time, but I think it was well worth doing, and really appreciate you guys doing that. I did send in a couple comments with the manager, and I'm sorry, Mr. Costello, I sent it to your email that was apparently not the right one, and got a reply from the airport commission's attorney regarding it. And so I sent back a couple other comments to her. I haven't heard anything back, so I wasn't sure if the commission had received that or not. And what I would like to do is echo what Mary said, what Peter said, what Aisha said. I think those are all very valid points. And I know relocating was not the first choice. I do believe I heard that some of the reasons was for the endangered species, that this was the best location. And so I reached out to Natural Heritage just to kind of ask them a few questions about that application. And they're more than willing to, if the airport commission chooses to, allow for an amendment to the permit. It's just the airport commission needs to ask if they could do this in an alternative location. And so I didn't know, are there any documents possibly from Natural Heritage denying any other locations of this, or has the airport commission asked Natural Heritage for a different location? The person who I spoke to was unaware of any of those. So I figured I would reach out and ask you guys if that had happened. I know I had circled back about the Natural Heritage a couple meetings ago, and so I figured I'd ask you for some clarification on that.
Thanks. Mr. Carberg, is there anything there? Is that something we'd rather, you'd want to research and get back to Ms. Perry?
I'll want to review this with our permitting agents and then be happy to respond to Ms. Perry.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple more questions. I'll try to be super quick. And then I know we've moved on from the PFAS berm, but I thought I had heard before part of the reason for using the PFAS berm was the material, the soils couldn't be removed from airport property. Is that still correct?
Mr. Carberg?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's what I heard. And so I gave a call to Mass DEP, and they said there's actually no regulation or law preventing hazardous soil from being removed from the airport property and taken to a licensed hazardous waste disposal site, such as Clean Harbor, for example. And Clean Harbor, when they were reached out to, are still available and would take this hazardous material. So I wasn't sure if the airport commission was aware of that, but there is the option to remove the PFAS soil from the airport site itself and have it taken to a licensed hazardous waste facility such as Clean Harbor. I figured I would throw that out there. And maybe this is something that the airport commission could look a little bit further into, or do a little bit more of a review of the project, because I feel like those were fairly easy phone calls for me to make and check and ask on. And maybe things have changed since the airport last did that, but I figured I would throw it out there and see if that's something that the commission would consider. One, relocating, looking at the permits that you have, maybe amending the permits, and those are all choices that the commission can choose to do. And two, looking at actual removal of the PFAS contaminated soils to a licensed hazardous waste facility that does take it in. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys holding these public meetings.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. Ms. Molden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. Emily Molden with the Nantucket Land and Water Council. I also wanted to echo the thanks for holding this meeting and the joint meeting last week, and for continuing to have this public dialogue with the community about this project. I think a lot has been said. I also wanted to acknowledge and thank you for moving away from the noise berm as it had been proposed. I think that the solutions that are currently being explored with the noise barrier, the wall, and maintaining a healthier forest in that vicinity is definitely a step in the right direction. I think I recognize and have seen some notes and additional discussion about addressing noise concerns and impacts. And I think that a number of those measures will also serve to support or address some of the concerns around exhaust and emissions. But I just wanted to, as a follow-up to some of the comments and concerns that we've brought to the table for a number of times now, just follow up on the comments, and also encourage the commission to continue to move forward and work on operations management in ways that can help to address impacts from the exhaust and emissions. And I also want to thank the chair for his comment on the implications of doing this, not just for this newly proposed ramp, but for existing conditions in the existing ramp. I think that it's really important moving forward for the airport to continue to communicate how they plan to improve conditions across the site with regard to exhaust and emissions. So I'll also continue to follow up and look forward to hearing more from the airport in the future about how they're going to address those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Molden. Ms. Daub?
Thank you. I'd like to thank NOAA specifically for the time it took to research and present the alternatives. I would also like to go on official record as supporting moving the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Daub. Mr. Klepper?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And Noah, I just wanted to say thank you for being so responsive to my questions and my emails into the commission. You know, we live in the Nobodere Valley. We do live on Monahans, and I do have to go on record to really state my concern, as Mr. Keppel said, and then also Mr. McKay, with the actual expansion of the noise barrier. The single engine prop planes parked at the proposed location would destroy the quality of our life in the summertime. It would be unbearingly loud. And having been around these planes, from Cessnas to Beechcraft Bonanzas, and even friends that have flown in to meet us, they're so loud. But the parking of those, if you put 50 of them all together at the proposed location, I would have to say that the entire Nobodere Valley would be gravely impacted by the noise. I wanted to go on record to talk about that. That is something that really needs to be reviewed. I almost feel like these planes sometimes are the afterthought, and the afterthought is to put them in our backyard. And that just can't happen. I respect all the things that are going on. I really appreciate everybody's willingness to talk through this. The community embracing this and having an open forum to be able to do this. I just couldn't be more thankful. And I wanted to make sure that this went on record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klepper. I appreciate your comments, and Mr. Couples. I think that is something that we certainly don't want to leave overlooked. And as we're looking at this barrier, you know, what kind of modification, inclusion, adjustment, if you will, to perhaps maybe I shouldn't use the word encapsulate, but to mitigate that as part of the overall project, I think should be part of what we're exploring for sure. And I think, as I'll just add one other thing, I would think that we should also be considering the management of that grass tie down area in terms of our overall ramp management program as well. That should be as important and included as the paved area when we're working on that. So thank you very much for bringing that to our attention so that we can be sure to put some focus into that. Ms. Fanoof, did I get that right? Or Mr. Sheehan?
Sitting with Ann.
You're muted. Mr. Sheehan.
Oh, okay, thank you. And thank you very much for the meeting. I'm glad we're finally talking, and I'm glad I think we're making some headway. I'm just going to start out by saying I also agree that the project should move to the other side. Literally everything we've talked about at this meeting and all the other meetings, they've been caused by a traffic jam, which was created when the jet ops was positioned where it was, so close to the commercial area. Everything we've talked about, it basically falls like apples from a tree from that. It's an unfortunate decision. I'd wish somebody had done a U-turn back in the days. That is not going to happen now. But I'd like to go on record to say it was a bad idea, should have been turned around. I think someday, 20 years from now, maybe, that's where things are going to happen over there. That being said, I had a question. Can you give these jet people a time frame on which they can arrive and depart, or do they just come whenever they feel like it? Would that not help taxi time and congestion, etc., if that was in place? I'm not sure how it works. I don't know what the regulation is. If they show up at a certain time, is that when they have to land? I'm not sure. But if you gave them a time frame, and it might not be possible to meet every time, but if you gave them a time frame, wouldn't that help to stagger the landings and takeoffs? Thank you. And I have another question after that, but if you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, may I? It's a very good question. The answer is en route and air traffic is run and managed by the FAA. Federal air traffic preempts any and all local regulation as to an airport reservation or timed arrival and departure. But FAA preemption, specifically air traffic control.
And your other question, Mr. Sheehan?
The other question was, if in fact we do that barrier wall, how much more of the woods would you have to take? Because at the moment, basically 38% of what was there was taken. I'm just wondering how much more would be taken if you did in fact go with the wall. I know you perhaps be removing trees on behind the wall, but I'm just wondering how much more would have to go.
I believe it was about 15 feet. Mr. Lasden, is that about right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's approximately right.
About 15 feet, okay.
Yeah.
And if you do decide on the vegetation, it would go up against the back of that wall, is that correct?
The idea would be to put the wall close to the aircraft and
Correct.
leave the trees between the wall and your homes.
But would you be adding more vegetation though?
I think the airport commission would look into adding additional trees, and I won't speak on behalf of the commission, but there has been discussion between the airport commission and the airport management about supplemental vegetation. What that looks like at this point, I don't know.
Okay. Even though it might not make a huge dent, I think the added vegetation does in fact act as a carbon sink, even though it's not as much as we'd like it to be, it still helps somewhat. So whatever you can save would be much appreciated, okay? And thank you again for the meeting. It's great to be talking about this finally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan.
I'm David McKay, right next to Dick. I also want to reiterate that I wish this was on the other side of the airport where the industrial stuff is, that jet should be able to park there rather than the area where all people live. I appreciate your listening to us now. And I just think most people on Nantucket would be in favor of either no project or moving it to the other side if they had a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Mr. Atherton?
Can you hear me now?
Thank you. Can you hear me? I just unmuted.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Two things, both of which are a follow-up of my earlier comments a couple of meetings ago. One has to do with the zoning. And I've raised the issue of why the article is on the town meeting this year. And I think the answer I got was usually, well, that's all been taken care of. We don't have to worry about it. I would suggest you owe us not you personally, Arthur, but the commission, along perhaps with our local zoning authorities, ought to put in writing why that's the case. What are the issues involved? Is that same sort of dismissal of the zoning going to be impacting other areas of the airport property, which are similarly zoned, Lug 3? And so we just get a clear understanding of where you're headed. Maybe the FAA tells us they're in charge of our zoning and not us. My second comment is I have a feeling, and I think I heard earlier, one of the commenters talked about expansion, and we might continue to have additional parking areas necessary. I just want to encourage the commission to remember they represent our community. And I know you've had ample public hearings for years on these matters, and you have a full plan of where the airport is heading. But I think this kind of an event over the past few weeks should make clear that there's much broader community participation that you need to encourage. I think a lot of people would appreciate some limits on our airport that you might agree we can't just add parking forever. We can't just accommodate this kind of activity. And I think the Airport Commission needs to recognize that and engage a broader group of community people involved in that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atherton. On the first point of zoning, we have looked at that. I think we gave you the answer, but I'm not sure, more that you want on that. Maybe I could quickly defer to Airport Council, not to put you on the spot, Ms. Marshall, but I know you've looked into it, and could you maybe just address that briefly?
Yes, certainly happy to just briefly address that. So I understand that the select board put Article 49 on the town meeting warrant as part of its kind of long-term goal under the master plan to make sure that uses in a certain district align with the zoning for that area. So that's the reason behind the proposed change. I understand also that the town's position is that this doesn't impact the expansion project or the uses at the airport at all. That's because municipal uses, of which the airport is one, are permitted across all districts in the town of Nantucket. So the rezoning doesn't really impact things. It just kind of reflects the fact that the airport is more of a, obviously, industrial use, a commercial use than it is a residential use.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. And I hope that helps Mr. Atherton. And then to your second point, I think you put a fine point on what many of us probably are feeling, and understanding, you know, the community's position. That I don't think that there is future discussions, or, you know, there has not been discussions at this commission level related to having another project beyond this project. So I can only speak for the near future, I suppose, in the current situation, but I do think that this exercise has been enlightening and helpful, and personally take it to heart. So I think we'll continue to do the best we can, and I know there's some difference of opinion with respect to expansion helping, but I under the current demand, and not this isn't an effort to the so-called, I think you may have mentioned it, or for someone else, build it and they will come. This is how do we accommodate in a way that, again, I know that this same point can't really come up enough. Safety is really first. We have to operate a safe airport. We also don't want to, cause negative impact. So where is that line? And that's, I think, what we're really trying to promote is better safe operations that allow for better management of this area. Now you probably use that same argument to say, well, does that mean more come and then you do that again? I don't personally support that or believe that that's what should be done right now. I think that we would have to look at other, they may have to look at other alternatives at that point. So I see you do have your hand right back up, Mr. Atherton, so go ahead.
I'll just follow up on the zoning. I would encourage the board to get that in writing, an opinion, so it's absolutely clear that the citizens know that the current zoning on the airport property, the town, the airport commission can do whatever they want. I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but I think we ought to be clear on how that operates. And I think in terms of the select board putting it on the agenda, I don't think the airport issues and the possible impact of zoning were made clear to the select board. It's more a continuation of, we're just moving along on our program to align our zoning with the underlying use. But they clearly, when I talked to selectmen, they weren't aware that the airport was part of this discussion. So that's why I think it would be helpful to get it in writing and make it absolutely clear. Thank you.
Again, I just would say that I think, and Mr. Carver, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the article came through planning and not proposed. It wasn't proposed by the airport, just to be clear. So anyway, I hope that helps. For those that are making comments through the chat, please know that those aren't part of the public record. And, if you want to submit additional comments, you can send them in writing, or, be recognized, please. Before I go back to folks that have already spoken, is there anybody else? And I will recognize you, Ms. Lepre and Mr. Walsh. Is there anybody who hasn't spoken yet that would like to speak? The floor is yours, Ms. Lepre.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak again.
Sure.
I don't quote my father all that often, but I am here going to quote something that he says all the time about addiction solutions, which is nobody is ever too far gone. We are, people slip and we help them up again. And I think as well, in my career as a nurse practitioner, And in medicine, you see things where we think something is a great drug, it's a miracle. We used to use Cytotec for gastric ulcers, and we found that it was causing women to abort their babies. So now we don't give it to women who are pregnant, except for in smaller doses for induction. But so we've learned, we see, gee, we made this, we had this plan, we thought this was a great thing, and now we're realizing that that was maybe a mistake. And maybe we need to look at it again. So I think that the same is with this plan. Nobody is too far gone. No project is too far gone, and this could be looked at again. And I also just had a question because Mr. Carberg said at the meeting with the select board that when we're talking about health and human safety, sending a fire truck across an active runway that is a mile away versus a few hundreds away, that is a consideration. And I understand that. But I'm curious, do parked jets just burst into flames here? Because I don't own a jet. I don't fly on private jet. So I'm unsure how often this occurs. And I also want to know, what I do know is the health and safety of the direct abutters is not really being considered with this plan. I know that you all are working with us, and I really appreciate the communication, and I really appreciate these meetings, because I do think finally there is some communication and some dialogue about this. But I think that the chance of a random jet bursting into flames a mile away shouldn't be more important than the lead poisoning of children, the PFAS poisoning, all of that of the fellow community members. So I do think that nothing is too far gone, and I would be wholeheartedly in favor of this project being moved. And I do hope that the commission would look at that, because it sounds like there's a lot of people on this meeting that feel that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lepre. Mr. Walsh.
Yes, hi. I'm just listening in, and as far as airplanes coming in, and you could put a PPR of 3 hours for all Cat 3 aircraft, and that would kind of solve part of the problem of big 5 airplanes arriving at the same time. You put a PPR on them and they can't do that. Second, I'm for moving this project, but I'm for moving the general aviation part of this project over to the other ramp at the beginning. But in order to do that, you're going to have to put the parallel taxiway for 1533 on the north side of 33, where it would join into the area over on the commercial, on the Bunker Road side. So in the future, you put a ramp for general aviation, the prop airplanes that you don't want the noise, move them all over there and pave part of the place over there, but make an exit onto the parallel taxiway that's adjacent to that area. And maybe Mr. Carberg can just address that for the jets and the time coming in.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I think when we get into a general discussion about relocation, we could, perhaps hit on the kind of infrastructure or all of the alternatives. And I think that we just want to get all the comments first. Is there anybody else that would?
How about the PPR for the, in case you don't know, a prior permission required. PPR means prior permission required. If you put that in the NOTAM, anybody with a Class 3 wide airplane, or even a Class 2, you can put that restriction on them that if it's getting too crowded, that they have to get a PPR for, and they'll get a slot to come in. They'll give them a time that they can come in. And that's nothing to do with the FAA. The FAA handles air traffic control, but the PPR is the airport manager's ability to limit operations at the airport. Thank you.
Thank you. I would have to defer to Mr. Carberg on that. Mr. Carberg, is that something you?
Sure, I'll just say sometimes pilots don't follow airport instructions and it makes it difficult on the ground. It's something we've tried before. Thank you.
Thanks. With that, is there anybody else that would like to be heard? We do appreciate, the feedback. I think it is helpful. We'll have a discussion at the commission level at this point and sort of close it for public comment. I prefer not to have a whole bunch of, have the floor open now for anything that you'd like to say, and we'll do our best, as we've been trying to do with this project and for the community. Ms. Daub.
Thank you for recognizing me again. Just to follow up on Bob Walsh and what Noah said, I get that sometimes pilots don't listen to the rules, but I don't think that's a good enough reason to not have the rule. I think it should be considered. Thank you.
Thank you.
WPR, that he said.
Thank you. Ms. Khan?
Yes, thank you again. There was a document, I apologize, I put it into the chat when you said, to not do that. Sorry about that. There seems to be some support from FAA on the environmental information, and I don't know if that's worth looking into. There is a part of it where it says, and I'll just read directly from there, in cases where it is not immediately feasible to reduce lead emissions, consider minimizing the public's outdoor air exposure to lead emissions by either shifting fences to increase the distance between run-up areas and public observational areas, and or posting signs to discourage loitering by the public in those areas where they may be potential and unnecessary exposure to lead from piston engine aircraft emissions. It just goes then on into, any change in operation that relocates a lead emission source must be carefully considered. I think maybe I just keep bringing this up is because I really feel that perhaps this information was not provided to the Airport Commission to the extent that it is. The same happened with the PFAS and AFFF. Sometimes we come across these situations where we are told they're under the hazardous number or they are safe, but legal and being legal isn't always safe. That's something, unfortunately, I hate to admit, but that's true. And sometimes what we think is able to be done because it's legal is just at that point considered safe, but it's more of a lack of study and more of maybe the way that a study is done and maybe other things that in the future we then find out is hazardous to our health. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Okay, with that, I would like to open up the discussion. Mr. Carver, could I ask you to put the slide back up with your recommended or the direction that you're seeking, just so that we could have discussion at the commission level? And so to just go back over this, a quick summary, options 1, 2, and 3 were forest management, the noise wall, and Mr. Carver, number 3.
Number 3 would be a berm, but with off-site soil.
Right. So maybe we, perhaps we work backwards. I'm going to try to facilitate discussion, but commissioners, please, feel free to kind of go. Is there any support for further exploration of a berm using, soil not containing PFAS that would then result in, having to remove more of the vegetation? So I'm not hearing that. So I think, Mr. Carberry, it would be safe to, we'll presume that number 3 is off the table and just for discussion. So now, I think the question is, maybe we bounce back, if I could, to number 1. You know, I think that it seems logical, that, you know, we see what we can do to better manage that forest land and maybe some supplemental plantings. Once we find, you know, where there, may be some thinner areas and see what we could do to put some resources into that. Does anybody have any further thoughts, agreement or disagreement on that approach?
Sure, I'll speak.
Yes, please, Mr. Buscarin.
I spent a lot of time, I think, talking with people, mostly Noah, but other people at the airport, and also with you, Arthur, regarding keeping as much plantation as we can put in that area to protect our neighbors. I think we all agree that a wall is a lot better than a berm, and I think we're going to study that, and we won't get that built until after this season, after the summer season. But we certainly should do this between now and then, active management of the forest. So I strongly support that.
Thank you, as do I. Anybody not agree with that approach?
No, I support that.
Great. So
And I support it.
thank you, Ms. Topham. So I think that takes us to number 2, right? I think we're pretty much in line with, you know, not doing the berm, with seeing what we can do to better manage the and improve the forest and the vegetation in that area. And now the discussion is related to the barrier. And is there anybody that wants to speak further on, you know, whether to support or not support this approach?
Arthur?
Yes, Mr. Marks.
Yeah, I support the wall. I think that actually, well, it's probably the best thing for the neighbors as far as dealing with the sound. And it also gives them the added benefit of obviously the trees behind it, which will help mitigate sound as well, but obviously not as effective as the wall. But it also gives them a nice, you know, the aesthetically too, right? The trees are more aesthetically pleasing to the neighbors versus a big pile of dirt and or seeing a wall. So I agree with supplemental, you know, planning behind the wall. I support the wall. I think the wall needs to be extended to the extent of where the aircraft will be. And on the south end of that wall, I think we need to have a return. Of course, a sound expert will be better handled at this than myself, but it makes sense to me that you wouldn't just run the wall straight out. You'd want to have a maybe 30-degree angle on that at the end to help send the noise back away from the houses as well that would be created back in there. If I may, I'd like to just add a couple of the comments that I made notes of while people were talking relative to the noise, if you don't mind.
Certainly, the floor is yours, Mr. Marks.
So I noticed in Hyannis, I'm a pilot, so in Hyannis, they have a run-up area in Hyannis, which is located more centrally. Now they actually don't tell us to use that or anything, but it doesn't mean it's not a bad idea. And I don't know if maybe working with Mr. Carberg, of course, to understand this areas, if we could find a little bit better spot where, especially on runway 6, because runway 24 is the other way, and both of the other runways, you're away from this area. So it'd only be on runway 6, or departing on runway 6, that you would need a run-up area for the piston airplanes, which actually, in my opinion, that's what would create a lot of the exhaust fumes and obviously the potential for, you know, the lead coming out of the fuel, which is obviously in there. And by the way, the government's pushing hard to get rid of the lead in the fuel. I know there's at least 2 different companies that are manufacturing lead-free fuel. It's not really commercially available yet, but we are working hard towards that end. And then I don't know, the piston planes, parking them all the way down on the end again. I feel like I hear what the people down there are saying. You're right, we're pushing all that noise down there. And I don't know what the limitations are as far as spacing from the aircraft to the runways and or taxiways is, but I don't know if maybe there's any possible way to utilize any of the area over on the north ramp for transient aircraft. I know that may create some safety issues that I may not be as up to speed on. So I would hope we could maybe explore that so we don't like pile all the planes way down at the end of that ramp. That's kind of what I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Anybody else have anything further? I think we probably can stop the screen share if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Carberg. Thanks. Anyone else, anything further? So I'm wondering, just for clear direction, perhaps it would be beneficial to have a motion and a vote to memorialize sort of the approach, which I would think would be along the lines of not proceeding with the berm, using further investigating and utilizing forest management improvements, and further study and investigation of the of a noise barrier or sound attenuation device.
I'll make that motion.
Go ahead. Yeah, free to open for discussion. Or
Yeah, Arthur, just real quick, I know one of the other things, I don't know if it, there's probably some people there that do this stuff all the time around airports, and I think one of those people has done some stuff for us. If there's any way that there's that they can help mitigate the fumes as well, right? And that was something that a lot of people brought up, and of course, this is a concern for everybody. Within the structure of that wall, right? Not just sound, but if there's something out there, we should try to understand what that might be, to mitigate the fumes.
Certainly.
That's whether it's directional thing or whatever, right? Sorry.
Oh, don't apologize. And I was just throwing out a suggestion to see, where we might end up on this. But I think just for clarity, and hope the public understands that this is where the commission is committed the direction to head in. So with that, I don't know if anyone wants to reword, or if Ms. Nelson, did you get that as a potential motion then made by Ms. Topham? Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And as suggested by Mr. Marks, to include study related to emission reduction. So that is your motion, Ms. Topham?
Yes, it is. That's my motion.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
So the motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing not, Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Thank you. And I guess the next part of this, related to how we proceed right now with that, Mr. Carberg, do you need any additional direction or discussion or questions? Or are we clear, and you've got your sort of what you'd like?
I think we're clear. We discussed we're going to have a special commission meeting. If it's in 7 days, I probably won't have a substantial update. But I think at the interval of our monthly commission meetings, any item that comes up, I can bring any progress I have back. Mr. Laston is here. He's our consulting engineer. He's involved on the project. I would encourage him to get to work right away on helping us develop a scope for this.
Thank you. And that'll move us on to the PFAS investigation update. I want to say that I know that some folks have made some comments about the size of the packet. It was not at all to try to flood everybody. It's also, it seems like we're in a little bit of a no-win sometimes with transparency concerns, if you will, but there it all is. And I hope it also shows the level of work that is going in by both staff and consultants related to these matters. And so with that, I would turn it over to Mr. Carberg or Ms. Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to turn it over to Cameron Woods, Environmental Coordinator, but I would like to steal one of her bullet points, which is that we are asking Weston Solutions to attend next month and present these reports, as is customary, after we include them in the packet.
Ms. Woods.
Please.
Hi, everyone. So there are two reports that were published and they are quite large. So I will share a brief summary and then I will leave it to Weston Solutions at the next meeting to really get into the nitty-gritty. So the IRA Immediate Response Action Status Report number 15 was published on February 23rd. And it was basically a summary of all of the immediate actions that we're taking at this time. The two primary points being that bottled water is still being provided at the discretion of the airport in an effort of good faith to residents with concentrations of PFAS-6 in their wells, who do not have the ability to connect to a municipal water line. But once the town does extend the water line to these remaining homes on the west side, the airport will terminate that service. PFAS-6 was detected above applicable soil criteria in soils along Monahans, located west of the South Ramp at J in the Sun Island area and in the runway 15 approach area. And so this will prompt additional investigations as part of the comprehensive site assessment to assess the nature and extent. The second report was the Phase 2 Comprehensive Site Assessment Report, and that was published on March 7th. This report is even larger, but again, I will share a brief summary with the Commission. The report investigated the 9 documented locations at the airport where AFFF has and was historically been released, as well as several additional potential release areas, including along Monahans Road, the Sun Island Road area, runway 15 approach, and runway 15 run up. More than 1,300 soil, groundwater, and drinking water samples were collected and analyzed at a state certified analytical laboratory for PFAS. And all but 2 locations where soil samples were collected on AC property within the NPD WSA had concentrations of PFAS-6 below the S1 GW3 standards. In areas where soil was compared to the S1 GW1 standards, a number of locations had detections of PFAS-6 above these standards, though they primarily were in the top 2 feet of below ground soil. All groundwater samples collected from the airport property within the NPD WSA were below the GW3 standards for PFAS-6. Groundwater outside of the area does exceed the GW1 standards on airport property in the runway 15 approach area and the Sun Island Road area. Groundwater also exceeds the GW1 standards to the west of the airport in the vicinity of Evergreen Way and to the south along NBR. A combined risk characterization report was done using method 1 and method 3 tactics, and it was performed on the site to evaluate the potential for risk to human health, the environment, and public safety. The assessment evaluated soil, groundwater, and drinking water and concluded that there is no current or foreseeable future risk associated with PFAS in soils at the disposal site. The final quick summary point is that the results of this Phase 2 CSA indicate that a condition of no significant risk does not exist for potential future use of groundwater outside of the NPD WSA. So as a result, additional comprehensive response actions are required to evaluate potential remedial actions that could be employed to address the risk, specifically a Phase 3 identification. So that would be another one of these reports. And that is necessary to select a remedial action alternative for the disposal site pursuant to 310 CMR 40.0850. So that report is due to Mass DEP by March 3rd, 2025. That was a lot of environmental jargon, a lot of complex analysis, but Weston will be able to walk you through all of that next month. And that is it for me on the PFAS front.
Thank you, Ms. Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioners, any questions? Ms. Lepre?
Thank you so much. I actually did find the packet super interesting. And I'm just curious because in one section they wrote that there was a house on Matacasham that did not test over the limit, and then you guys, but you followed it and retested it again. And then it was tested over, so it did get hooked up. And then there was another house that it looks like was tested high, but they kept mentioning that they declined bottled water and hookup. And so if there are houses that then test positive, like I'm through the health department, you can test you can test your water for PFAS now. So if there were houses around the airport that were tested low before, but now all of a sudden are now testing high, are you guys going to take that data like you did with the Matacasham and hook those people up to water? I'm just curious. I have water, so I'm very happy, but I just think this is going to be like a constant, because when you look at the plume, I'm just curious, you did it on Matacasham, would you be doing it in other areas?
Mr. Carberg.
That's a site-specific answer. I'd be happy to refer that to our LSP and get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? We'll look forward to Weston Solutions at our next meeting and further discussion. And again, thank you for all the good work here and continuing to make progress here. Again, PFAS it's a horrible thing, and we're all in this, together as a community and doing the best that we can for something that, we had to, the airport had to use. Mr. Carberg.
Okay. Thank you. Continuing, and thank you, Cameron. Continuing with the agenda for the crew quarters projects. We are finalizing our bid package for release. I don't think that happened today. It may tomorrow. The bid contains the site work, which includes a sewer extension and a modular unit procurement under a single general contractor. Bids are due in the middle of April, which allows us time to evaluate them and bring them into town meeting if any adjustments are required to our supplemental housing authorization request. I'll also discuss a retained earnings transfer further in that section of the agenda, but we're also going to plan on bringing a couple items to help fund that supplemental authorization. For our terminal optimization projects, the laser scanning, the ground penetrating radar portion of the survey, and the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing inspection work, they've all been completed. The hazmat contractors work is still ongoing. Our engineering and design team is reviewing this data to develop the unified model for all the base documents for the design team. I don't do this work, but understand it's called a Revit model, and it's common in the industry. The team is working on developing the project definition document for delivery to us in April or May. And this project definition document, what it does is it takes all of the site-specific inventory developed with the goals that the commission set forth in the charrette. And it basically reviews if we can accomplish what we wanted to, given the constraints of the facility, cost forecasts, and define reasonable expectations for the remainder of the design process. On those two items, I believe I also have Phil Cox, our OPM, and Rich Lassett, our engineer, if you have any further questions. We're all available.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding the crew quarters project? Please keep us posted, and we appreciate the efforts. Thank you. The terminal, Mr. Carberg?
With budget transfers, I believe.
Okay.
Okay, so in your packet on packet page 764, it's down there, I know, is our list of budget transfers that we'd like to bring into annual town meeting. This is a list that Jamie develops, and while I meet with her to discuss strategy and priority in terms of ongoing capital, the transfer amounts, their sources and destinations are her recommendations, and I really try to follow them very closely. I don't direct a lot of changes. Jamie usually directs these to pay off capital projects or short-term borrowing authorizations instead of taking on the short or long-term debt. associated with financing a project. So it's like buying your car when you buy it instead of financing with the dealer. I'm not planning on going through each one. I'm happy to do that. I picked all of the ones over $500,000 to discuss in detail here. I know Jamie was here. She had some internet issues at home. I don't know if she's still online.
I'm here.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. So Jamie's also available for your questions. She does a great job on this.
Thank you.
So
Thank you,
line,
Mr. Carberg, and thank you, Ms. Sansbury. Go ahead, Mr. Carberg.
so for line one, we're looking to reappropriate $606,082.76 remaining from the taxiway Echo project to the South Ramp expansion. For line four, we are transferring $3 million from retained earnings to the South Ramp project with the goal of avoiding a short-term ban and that associated interest, and to retire that first tranche of projected long-term debt. So at this time, we don't think we need to take any debt long-term for the project for our sponsor share. We'll have a similar goal in 2025, but the actual balance between those years really depends on what's billed out by the contractor before the close of the fiscal year on June 30th. But we think that amount is appropriate and conservative and will cover our share. On line 7, we're also transferring $600,160 from retained earnings to our airfield paint beads and rubber removal project. This project was completed in the fall of 2023, and doing this will keep us from taking a short-term borrowing authorization or taking it to long-term debt. So we can retire that project, is the word. And then for the final 2 lines, thank you, Boyana. We have 2 transfers into one project. $2.5 million from retained earnings, $700,000 from the fuel revolver. Both of these are going to our employee housing supplementary authorization. What this would do is it would effectively fully fund this authorization if bids for the project come in under budget. Or if the bids for this project come in over our combined 2 authorizations of $7 million and change, we could then ask annual town meeting to increase our authorization, having demonstrated our funding commitment to the project. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions, but really more likely deferring them to Jamie.
Thank you. Any questions or thoughts on the suggested budget transfers? My sense is, thank you for reviewing them with us, but I feel like we're in very good hands with your management and Ms. Sansbury's work on these. So that's it, if no one has anything further. Am I understanding correctly that both of the MassDOT awards remain pending?
That is correct.
Okay, so that will move us on to the tenant alteration application for airport gas. Mr. Carberg.
So thank you. So in your packet, we've put the full planning board application for my tenant airport gas that went to the planning board. And I believe was, I know passed or approved or accepted is their word, but it went through yesterday's planning meeting. Airport gas had provided follow-up material as requested by the planning board on stormwater management and open space. Typically staff review the tenant alteration applications, but again, this is they're an anchor tenant. They're a very visible operation. So per the discussion last month, I'm bringing the topic of the tenant alteration application back in front of the commission. I do want to say 2 positive items about the tenant. I believe they're committed to working with us through any process to identify appropriate landscaping. I don't have specifics on the landscaping, as I was going to ask Cameron to work with them to identify the plantings and locations, also specific to some monitoring wells we have in the area. And I believe I saw Mr. Sinclair here earlier. I just also wanted to speak in favor that they've been a responsive tenant on any operational or access issues that come up. And I believe that would be the case in the future.
Thank
But I
you.
believe I am looking for commission direction on the tenant alteration application.
Are there any questions, thoughts, comments? I think I just have one. I know you're gonna do the plantings, but I think it is important that we're very clear that that needs to be, dense, meaningful screening to the park, not, a plant here or there, right? The idea is really that the park is sort of kind of dividing, I think, the industrial nature of a gas station to that park area. But beyond that, which I believe they're committed to, and I second that. I really appreciate how the responsive they've been. I did attend the planning board meeting last night and did make the same sort of comment that that they were responsive and had agreed to be willing to do those plantings. And they also did, some of our other concerns, I think, or at least I know I had them. And I know that the land council had also echoed them at the planning board, was related to the stormwater management system. And they provided all of that information so that it's sort of into that special permit, for the town in terms of making sure that the infrastructure is maintained and clean. And then finally, the other point was they committed that the soaps, detergents, and whatnot that they're using would be PFAS free. So I'm not sure if I was repetitive to one of those points, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that I think you did have a little bit of an overlap. But I think that we came hopefully to a good place and, wish the tenants success in their operation. And with that, I think if there's no other comment, I think we would want, do you actually want a motion and a vote on that? Or you would just sort of, you typically handle that at your discretion, I believe, Mr. Carver?
So no action would just be the default, which is staff managing the tenant alteration application.
Very good. Okay. Does anyone else have anything further on that? Okay, so that'll move us on to the manager's report.
Okay, thank you. For our AIP projects, taxiway golf, I don't have an update. For North Ramp hard stands, we'll approach you for the special business meeting coming up for that task order, as well as one other item, but it's escaping me. No update on the airport master plan or the geometry project. Or the ARF truck, other than the ARF truck is moving forward. And it will come to us as a completely fluorine-free foam product from build all the way to our acceptance of it in a year. I'm sorry, the runway 624 center line would also be part of that special business meeting. For non-AIP projects, we are working on a fence relocation project. A minor move in the bunker area. We've received positive feedback, and we just need to document that before we move forward and discuss it with our tenants. Similarly, for our capital project or potential capital project for the South Shore fence relocation, we need and want to have ongoing discussions regarding project timing. Really, and this happens in real time as we go forward with the season and we see how quickly some of these species bloom and the botanist is able to recognize them. So the plan is to keep moving forward and watch these plants as they begin their cycles. For the fuel farm loading rack, the GAC filter issue has been resolved. McFarland Johnson will be here next week to inspect the concrete spall under the one support I-beam that we're concerned about. Trask Petroleum will install lightning arresters. Preston is coordinating that work. And then Rob Holgate is coordinating an electrician to install the same device on our gates and in the terminal at the doors that have been susceptible to lightning strikes. We've sent on rates and charges, we've sent leases and pro formas to the airlines. They requested some additional feedback. I have a meeting with them this week. For RFP bid status, staff continues to explore an idea to provide via an RFP valet services at the FBO and possibly the terminal lot as well to help with some of our congestion. We've issued a IFP for brush mowing services. It went available to the public at the end of February. Bid date is in a couple weeks here in March. RFP for employee housing on the 18th is when it should be available. The proposal is due on the 24th of April. And then we continue to receive interest in raw land leases with buildings. That interest continues to accumulate. On the operations side of the house for fuel and supply, we're continuing our negotiations with World Fuel Services for fuel supply and mobile refueler. We received a first term sheet. Staff will meet, discuss with the goal of drafting a draft version of a new contract. Formal notice of the Airbus 220. We received that from JetBlue requesting May 9th. We said no. I think we advised June 9th or later. Want to comment work coordination to access the water line on the perimeter road for the town project. That work has been completed. I want to recognize Rob Holgate for his work. He was able to take that on and escort it while the rest of the staff was occupied. We painted the TSA private screening area. Maintenance is also painting areas in the FBO. It looks nice if you stop by to sign documents. We're working on our seasonal rehires and new seasonals. That's trending in a positive direction. We have the triennial drill scheduled for April 3rd. We'll be putting our formal announcements out to the community soon. So again, the triennial drill is our required mock disaster drill that takes place every 3 years. It's an important certification exercise. And then as a reminder, our rates and charges revisions take effect on April 1st. So anyone who pays any applicable fees that have changed with the update will see those changes take place April 1st. For statistics, again, we're in the winter, so these will go quickly. January ops are down 24%, down 11.6% year to date. Southwest ramp ops in January were down 35%. Employments are down 22% in January, down 5% on the year. For Cape Air in January, they were down 25% in the Boston market, 5% in Hyannis, and 66% on Martha's Vineyard. They were up 42% for New Bedford. For Jet A, we remain up 4% in our fiscal year to date average. We're up 4.5% over the previous 3 months and up 1.3% over the previous month. For the FBO trends, a little bit different as we are still reflecting some commercial service in total. We're down 3.4% for the fiscal year to date, up 45% over the last 3 months, down 1% over last February. Low lead is down 18% over our 3-year average, down 15% in the last 3 months, and down 32% over the past month. Freight is down 4% in January and down 8% year to date. The mail was up, but Cape Air Freight and UPS are down, and FedEx was flat. And then we had 0 noise calls in January. For our personnel report, I want to announce and welcome Fred Wellington into his new role as Operations Superintendent. We recently promoted him from Operations Supervisor, and we are now working to backfill that position. We are reviewing internal candidates now for the Operations Supervisor. And I expect good news. We'll have to wait for next month. We're welcoming Lionel Almonte into operations. He started on the 19th of February. And Mr. Liebert is returning under limited hours this summer to assist with our custodial effort. So if you see Lenny around, be sure to say hi. I'm grateful that he's back with us for a little bit. And then just generally, I wanted to express my gratitude for the efforts of staff. You know, staff have been taking some comments that really should be addressed to me. They've been doing a great job. I especially wanted to recognize Billy and Cameron for their work on school break week. They did a lot of work, limited assistance, and some pressing circumstances. And that would conclude my report.
Thank you, Mr. Carberg. Does anybody have any questions or comments on Mr. Carberg's report?
No.
So the next item on the agenda is commissioners' comments, and so my comments and I are sort of, I guess we're usually let everyone else go first, but I really think I wanted to follow up on Mr. Carberg's comments. And first, which wasn't on sort of my list, I am really encouraged about Mr. Wellington. I love that it's a we've really wanted to, I believe, promote an atmosphere where the staff believe feel that there's a career ladder. And it's really just a great thing. So, I hope that everyone realizes that. And I think that's good management and a good operation. And I'd love to see it. So congratulations to him. And I think that's really just great news. With respect to staff performance, over that break, I would second, having sort of been involved, also was away, but put a good amount of time in, given all of the circumstances, and was extremely impressed by both Billy and Cameron, and appreciative of your assistance there. And I would extend that to you, Mr. Carberg. You were also away, but you were there and, did what needed to be done, and didn't go unrecognized. And I think everyone should be aware that you really, in my opinion, stepped up at a time of need. And that's both, helpful to the airport operation, your staff, but also the community, given this particular circumstance. So the special meeting, was a situation that was somewhat unanticipated. At the same time, I think we knew the importance of doing it as soon as possible for our community. And that really meant, right after the break week, as soon as we could. And we worked with town administration to get that done. We had it on Monday, essentially as soon as everybody was back, without delay. And I think there was great value in that, and appreciate everybody's efforts, in preparation for that meeting. So just a long thank you, and that it's noticed. And following up on that meeting, the community really came out, and the commission had, I think, positive direction and discussion. And I think we hopefully can continue. Tonight really was a continuation of that, and work towards hopefully some goodwill there, and doing the best we can. That was sort of my follow-up to the manager's comments, as well as my commissioner comments, and I'll open it up if anybody else has commissioner comments. I will note that Mr. Marks apologized. He had to leave the meeting. Anyone else?
I would like to thank you and Noah for the presentation at the public meeting that we had. I thought you did an amazing job, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Topham. I tried, but certainly appreciate your words for sure. And with that, we will move on to public comment for anything that wasn't already discussed on the meeting. I'm not seeing any. And so I would entertain a motion to enter executive session per General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to review the executive session minutes enumerated on the agenda. Item B, Clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation regarding Walsh, where the chair has determined that an open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission. And Clause 7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant in aid requirements, not to return to open session. Is there such a motion?
So
I'll
moved.
make, no second,
Motion's been made and seconded. Ms. Topham, how do you vote?
aye.
Ms. Planzer,
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin? And the chair votes aye. And to the public, thank you all for attending. With that, we'll move